What do you do when your own mother tells you to leave your son in intensive care to blow up balloons for your sister? How do you stay calm when she says you're cut off? And the next day, your little boy wakes up and whispers that his grandma caused the whole thing? This is how I stopped being the weak son she could control and used the system she respected to end her power over us. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Adrian Morales, but most people just call me Addy. I am 39, I work in IT for a hospital network, and I used to think I knew what real stress was. Late nights, broken systems, angry doctors, that kind of thing. I thought I understood fear too, because I am a single father and money has never really been on my side, but nothing prepared me for the sound of my son fighting to breathe while machines did most of the work for him. The children's ICU is a place that feels quiet and loud at the same time. The lights are too bright, the air is too cold, and everything smells like disinfectant and plastic. There is always a soft beeping somewhere. My son, Leo, lay in a bed that looked too big for his small body. He had tubes in his arms and wires on his chest. His lips were a little swollen, his face pale. An oxygen mask covered his nose and mouth. Every few seconds, the monitor showed a green line that jumped in time with his heart. A nurse had explained to me earlier that Leo had an anaphylactic reaction. She told me that it was a very strong allergic reaction, that his airway had started to close, and they had to act very fast. She said that he was lucky the ambulance came when it did. She also said that there were clear signs of exposure to nuts. When she said that, my mind went blank for a moment. I knew Leo's allergy. I had repeated the same instructions to everyone in the family for years. I sat in the hard plastic chair next to his bed and watched his chest rise and fall under the thin blanket. I kept my hands folded, but sometimes I reached out and touched his arm just to feel the warmth of his skin. His eyes were closed. His hair was messy and damp from sweat. I kept telling myself in my head that he was strong, that he was going to wake up, that this was just another bump, like the smaller reactions he had when he was younger. I tried to believe my own thoughts. And time in the ICU does not move in a normal way. Minutes feel like hours. Hours feel like days. Every time a nurse walked in, my heart jumped. Every time a machine beeped a little faster or slower, I held my breath. I drank coffee from a vending machine cup that tasted like burnt water. I checked my phone again and again, even when there were no new messages. I was just tired and needed something to look at. That was not the monitor. At some point, a doctor came by, introduced himself as Leo's attending, and explained again that this was a serious reaction, but that they had control now. He said that Leo needed to rest, to be watched closely, and that the next 24 hours were important. I nodded to everything and said that I understood. My voice sounded flat, far away from me. The doctor asked me if Leo had eaten anything new, anything different. I told him that Leo had been at my mother's house, that she had watched him overnight, and that I always sent his safe food with him. I added that I had reminded her about the allergy like I always did. The doctor listened and wrote things down. He said that the ambulance reported a cake at the scene and that there were nut traces found. I felt something cold in my chest when I heard that, but I pushed it down. I did not want to think yet. I just wanted Leo to breathe. When Leo was stable enough that the nurses did not need me to move out of the way every few minutes, I stepped out into the family waiting room. I told myself I needed to stretch my legs. The waiting room was almost empty. There were a few chairs, a small TV on mute, and a coffee machine. The windows looked out on the city, but the glass made everything feel distant and unreal. For a moment, I stared at my own reflection in the window. I saw a man with dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, in yesterday's clothes. I barely recognized myself. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down and saw my mother's name on the screen. I hesitated. Then I answered. I thought she was calling to ask about Leo. She did not ask how he was. She started talking right away about my younger sister, Sophia. She reminded me that tomorrow was Sophia's birthday, that there was a party planned at her house, and that I needed to come help decorate and prepare the food. Her voice was brisk, like this was a normal day. She said that family events did not stop just because I had drama again. I told her, as calmly as I could, that Leo was in the intensive care unit, that he had almost stopped breathing, and that I was at his bedside. I explained that the doctor said the next day was critical. I said that I could not leave him, not even for an hour. My mother sighed loudly through the phone. She said that she was tired of my exaggerations, that Leo always had some small health issue, and that I used it as an excuse. She said that Sophia deserved one day that was not about my problems. I repeated again that Leo was not having some small issue, that he was in intensive care. I told her that I was looking at him through glass and wires. There was a silence on the line for a second, and I thought maybe she understood. Then she told me that if I chose to stay at the hospital instead of helping her, I should be ready to accept the consequences. She said that she was done carrying me, that she was done helping me with Leo, and that if I did not show up for Sophia's big day, I would be cut off from her help and from the family. Her words were calm, almost bored, like she was talking about canceling a subscription. Something inside me went very still. I did not shout. I did not argue. I simply told her that I was not going to leave my son. I added that I heard what she said. Then I ended the call. For a moment, I just stared at the phone in my hand. My thumb hovered over her name. Years of habit told me to call back, to explain again, to apologize even when I had done nothing wrong. Years of being the older son who made mistakes and needed to be forgiven told me to keep the peace. Instead, I opened the contacts and blocked her number. The action felt strangely small, just a tap on a screen, but heavy at the same time. I went back to Leo's room. The nurse glanced up and gave me a quick, soft smile, the kind people give when they know you are at the edge. I sat down in the chair again. I studied Leo's face. I thought about his last overnight at my mother's house, about how she had insisted that he needed normal experiences, that I was making him too sensitive, that a little bit of this or that would not kill him. I remembered handing her the bag with his safe snacks and the EpiPen, going through the allergy rules one more time, and her waving her hand like I was talking about the weather. Even then, I had felt a small knot of worry in my stomach. I had pushed it aside because I needed to go to work and because she had reminded me again that she was doing me a favor by taking Leo. I had told myself that she loved him and would not take chances. Now I sat there and stared at the rise and fall of his chest and did not know what to do with the anger slowly growing under the fear. The night passed in pieces. I dozed in the chair, woke up whenever Leo's monitors beeped in a different pattern, got up to stretch my legs, then sat again. Nurses moved quietly around us, checking lines and numbers. At some point, they adjusted his medication, and one nurse told me that his vitals were better, that he was stable, that this was good. I nodded and thanked her. In the early morning, the light coming through the small high window changed from dark blue to gray. The world outside the hospital was waking up. Somewhere, someone was probably already putting up balloons for Sophia's birthday. The thought felt distant and wrong. I was watching the monitor when I noticed a small movement from the bed. Leo's hand twitched under the blanket. I leaned forward, my heart suddenly loud in my ears. His eyelids fluttered. He took a deeper breath, and a small frown appeared between his eyebrows like he was trying to remember where he was. I stood up and moved closer. I said his name softly. His eyes slowly opened. They were unfocused at first. Then they found me. For a second, he looked confused, then scared, and then relieved. I told him that he was safe, that he was in the hospital, that the doctors helped him when his allergy got very bad. My voice shook, even though I tried to keep it steady. Leo tried to talk, but the mask and the dryness in his throat made it hard. The nurse came in, checked his numbers, then adjusted the mask so he could speak a little. She said that we should keep it short and gentle. I nodded. Leo's fingers reached out from under the blanket, and I took his hand. His grip was weak but real. He asked what happened in a small, rough voice. I told him slowly that he had an allergic reaction, that his body reacted strongly to something it should not have, and that the ambulance brought him here. I told him that he scared me, but that he was very brave, and that he was going to be okay. He listened with wide eyes. Then he told me something that made the room feel even colder. He said that he had a piece of cake at Grandma's house. He said that she told him it was real cake, that he would like it, and that he should not tell Dad because Dad would be mad at Grandma. He said that his mouth started to feel funny, and his throat started to hurt, and that he tried to say something, but everything became blurry. He said that he was scared. I felt his small fingers tighten around mine as he spoke. I felt my jaw clench. I did not interrupt him. I just listened. When he finished, I told him that he did nothing wrong, that he was not to blame, that he had trusted an adult who should have protected him. He looked at me with tired, trusting eyes. Then he took a slow breath and whispered that Grandma caused it. His voice was so soft that I almost could not hear it over the beeping of the machines, but the words were clear enough. Grandma caused it. The monitor by his bed kept beeping in a calm, steady rhythm while my own heartbeat pounded in my ears. When Leo whispered that Grandma caused it, something inside me shifted, but the change did not come like a storm. It came slow, like a crack in ice that has been there for a long time and finally reaches the surface. I sat in the ICU chair and held his hand, and at the same time, a whole history started playing in my head. It was not just about one piece of cake. It was about years of being told I was overreacting, years of being treated like the weak one who always needed to be corrected. After the nurse asked Leo to rest again and dimmed the lights, I stepped back into the corridor. The walls were a dull color, the kind hospitals choose to seem calm. A cleaning cart rattled by. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. I walked to the end of the corridor and leaned my back against the cool wall. I closed my eyes for a moment, and my mind went to my apartment, to the small kitchen where our life usually happened. At home, it was just the two of us most days. My kitchen table was scarred and old, but it was ours. It had crayon marks on one side where Leo used to draw superheroes while I checked my work emails. On weekday nights, I cooked simple meals, rice with vegetables, chicken, sometimes pasta. I kept a careful list on the fridge of what we needed and what we could afford. I knew exactly how far my paycheck could stretch. My mother liked to remind me that I was not earning what a man my age should be earning. She liked to say that a real provider did not need to look at prices. Most nights, Leo sat across from me with his small lunchbox open, and I checked his snacks for the next day. I always checked labels. I had online lists from allergy groups. I had called companies in the past to ask about cross-contamination. It had become a routine. It was our way of being safe. Leo sometimes rolled his eyes in the way kids do when they are tired of rules, but he followed them. He knew that his allergy was serious. He had learned that from me and from a few smaller reactions when he was younger that scared us both. My mother never really accepted that this was our reality. When Leo was first diagnosed as a toddler, she had told me that in her time, allergies were not such a big thing, that kids today were soft. I remembered sitting at her big dining room table, holding the papers from the doctor with clear instructions, and hearing her say that I was turning Leo into a victim. She said that I was a nervous boy even when I was small, and that now I was passing that on to my son. I tried to explain the difference between worry for no reason and respect for actual danger, but she waved off my words like they were smoke. Her house was always the opposite of mine. Her kitchen had new appliances, big shiny surfaces, expensive coffee machines she rarely used. The fridge was full of things bought on a whim. The dining room had heavy chairs and a long table where she liked to seat people so she could sit at the head and talk. Family photos covered the walls, and if you looked closely, you could see who she favored just by where the frames were placed. Sophia's photos were at eye level, in nice frames. Mine were usually smaller, a little higher up, or grouped in a corner. When my father was still alive, he was a quiet man like me. He did not argue with my mother often. When he did it in low tones. He worked long hours, built up some savings, and bought that house. After he died, we went to a lawyer's office once. I remember sitting in a room that smelled like paper and coffee while the lawyer went over some documents. He explained that my father had set up a family trust. He said that my mother could live in the house and use some of the income while she was alive, but that some decisions would need my signature too. He said that I was a co-trustee and that my father insisted on it. At that time, my head was foggy with grief. I signed where they told me to sign and went back to trying to hold my own life together. My mother started acting as if everything was just naturally hers. She talked about her house, her money, her hard work. She reminded me often that she let me bring Leo over, that she watched him sometimes, that she helped me when I was behind. Every favor came with a story about how she had saved me. Every small help became something she could hold over my head later. When I tried to remind her that my father had included me in the trust, she said that he only did that because he worried I would not be able to stand on my own. Sophia grew up in a different world from me, even though we lived in the same house for a while. She was the younger one, the bright one, the one my mother called her second chance. When she got a marketing job right out of college and started posting photos from work events, my mother repeated her stories to anyone who would listen. She loved saying that Sophia was going places. When I mentioned that my job kept hospital systems running so doctors could actually treat patients, my mother said that computers would be replaced soon and that I should think about something more prestigious. The pattern was always the same. When I made a choice, she treated it as a mistake. When Sophia made a choice, she treated it as a brave step. When I set a rule for Leo, like bedtimes or screen time, my mother said that I was being too strict. When I set safety rules, like the allergy guidelines, she said I was being too soft. It did not matter what I did. In her mind, I was always wrong. The allergy rules were the biggest point of tension. I had sent long messages to the family group chat explaining what Leo could and could not eat. I printed lists and stuck them on her fridge when she babysat. I showed her how to use the EpiPen more than once. Each time she listened for a little while, then told me that I had said it already, that she understood, that I needed to relax. There had already been one smaller incident at her house when Leo was 5. He had taken a bite of a cookie that had been on the same plate as nut cookies. He had started itching and coughing. We caught it fast, and it did not go as far as this last time. Afterward, I sat with her and explained that this was exactly why we had rules. She said that mistakes happen and then turned the conversation to how ungrateful I was for her help. She said that she was not a trained nurse, that she was just a grandmother doing her best, and that I made her feel like a criminal. She almost cried. In the end, I found myself apologizing to her for making her feel bad, even though my child had been the one at risk. I drove home that night with Leo asleep in the back seat and my stomach tight. I told myself that next time I would be firmer. Next time I would say no if I did not feel safe. But life is heavy and full, and a single parent has to make choices. When my work hours changed and my budget got tighter, my mother offered to watch Leo more often. She said that daycare and babysitters cost too much, that she could give him real family time. She said that it was stupid to pay strangers when I had a mother who wanted to help. She said that refusing her was an insult. I had no easy answers. I wanted Leo to have grandparents in his life. I wanted to believe that love would make her careful. So I agreed, but I kept repeating the rules. The last visit before the incident is burned in my memory now. It was a Friday afternoon. My mother called and said that she wanted to have Leo overnight and then spend Saturday baking with him before Sophia's birthday week started. She said it would give me a break. I hesitated. I told her that the baking part made me nervous because of the allergy. She laughed and said that she would use safe stuff, that she listened, that she was not an idiot. She sounded offended that I would even question her. When I dropped Leo off, I stood in her big kitchen with the bag of safe snacks and ingredients. I went through it item by item. I reminded her again that he could not eat anything with nuts, or that had been near nuts, or that she was not sure about. I told her that if she baked with regular ingredients for herself or for others, she had to keep Leo out of the kitchen or use separate tools and bowls. She rolled her eyes and said that I was talking to her like she was a child. She said that if I did not trust her, I should not leave him at all. I felt the familiar shame rise in my chest, the feeling that I was once again the bad son, the suspicious son. Leo hugged me and ran toward the living room, excited to watch cartoons and play with the old toys my mother kept there. He did not know about the silent push and pull between the adults. He only saw a grandmother who sometimes bent rules and gave him extra sweets. Before I left, I repeated to him to say no to anything he was not sure about and to remember to ask about the allergy. He nodded, distracted. He trusted me, but he also trusted her. Now, standing in a hospital corridor, all of that replayed in my mind. Every small moment where I had swallowed my worry and told myself to keep the peace showed itself clearly. Every time I had chosen not to argue in front of Leo, every time I had told myself that love meant giving my mother another chance, came back to me. Leo's weak voice saying that Grandma told him not to tell me about the cake echoed in my ears. I pushed myself away from the wall and walked back toward the ICU room. On the way, I passed the family waiting area again. A woman in a social worker badge was filling a form at a small desk. When she saw me, she gave me a gentle look and asked if I was Leo's father. I said that I was. She told me that part of her job was to check on families after serious incidents like this. She said that the ambulance had reported that Leo's reaction started at his grandmother's house and that he had a known severe nut allergy. Then she asked, in a soft but steady voice, if this had ever been an issue before and if I felt that he was safe there. When the social worker asked me if this had ever been an issue before and if I felt Leo was safe at my mother's house, I did not answer right away. I felt the question sit between us like a heavy object. For a long time, my first instinct had always been to protect my mother from criticism. Even when I was the one hurt, I found excuses for her. Now, Leo's words from the bed were still fresh in my mind. He had said that Grandma told him not to tell me. That part did not feel like a mistake. I told the social worker that there had been a smaller incident some years ago, at the same house with cookies, and that I had spoken to my mother about it many times. I said that I had sent written instructions about the allergy. I said that I had shown her how serious it was more than once. My voice sounded stiff. The social worker listened carefully. She did not interrupt. Then she said that in cases like this, the hospital made a note about the context of the reaction, especially when a known allergy had been ignored. She added that, if I wanted, she could connect me to people who handled child safety concerns. She used calm, professional words, but the meaning was clear enough. I felt a cold mix of shame and anger. But this time, the shame was not about what my mother might think. It was about the fact that I had let this pattern go on for so long. I thanked the social worker. I said that my son was my priority and that I would do whatever was needed to keep him safe now. She gave me a card with her name and some numbers on it and told me I could reach out later if I wished. Back in the ICU room, Leo had fallen asleep again. His small hand rested on top of the blanket. His eyelashes cast faint shadows on his cheeks. I sat down and let my mind run over the last 24 hours, like a tape I could rewind and slow down. My mother had almost no space in that replay. It was Leo's face, Leo's voice, the sound of the machines, the doctor's calm tone. A little later, Dr. Harris came in to check on Leo. He told me that Leo was responding well to the treatment, that they would keep him in intensive care a bit longer and then move him when it was safe. He said again that the reaction had been severe. Then he went over the allergy history with me. He asked if anyone had ever downplayed the risk or refused to follow the rules. I told him the truth. I said that my mother had often treated the allergy like a silly fear, and that she had now given Leo cake with nuts even though she knew better. The doctor's expression stayed neutral, but he made notes. He said that this kind of information mattered for Leo's file and for any future reports. When he left, the room felt larger and emptier. I stayed for a few more hours, until a nurse gently insisted that I go home, take a shower, and sleep a little. She said that I would be more useful to Leo if I did not collapse in the chair. I knew she was right. I squeezed Leo's hand once, told the nurse where to call me, and dragged myself out of the hospital. The world outside looked wrong, too bright. Cars moved, people walked, a bus passed by, all as if nothing had happened. I drove back to my apartment in a kind of fog. When I opened the door, the familiar smell of our place hit me, a mix of detergent, old books, and the last meal I cooked there. The apartment was quiet. Leo's school bag was still by the door, his small shoes next to my larger ones. In the kitchen, his cereal bowl from the morning before still sat in the sink. I stared at it for a moment, then washed it slowly, as if the simple motion could calm the noise in my head. The fridge still had his allergy-safe snacks lined up. The list on the door with his safe brands looked almost silly now, like a game we had been playing while the real danger came from somewhere I did not want to see. My phone buzzed. I checked the screen. It was a message from my mother. For a second, I was surprised. Then I remembered that I had blocked her number earlier. This was from her email, which she sometimes used when she wanted to write longer speeches. The subject line only said my name. I opened it. The message was long. She wrote that she had heard from Sophia that Leo was fine now, and that the reaction was being exaggerated. She said that I was telling people that she had tried to harm him, and that it was unfair. She wrote that she had given him a normal cake like normal children eat, and that if he was that fragile, maybe I should think about how I was raising him. She called me ungrateful. She said that she had always helped me, and that now I was trying to paint her as a monster. She added that, because of my behavior, she was thinking about changing certain plans related to the house and the future. She hinted at her will. She ended by saying that good sons did not turn against their own mothers in public. I read it twice. The words did not bring me to tears or rage this time. Instead, they clarified something that had been blurry for years. There was no real regret in that letter, no fear over what had happened to Leo, no sign that she had finally understood the gravity of his allergy. It was all about her image, her hurt pride, and her power. In her mind, my main crime was not that I had left my son in danger once again. It was that I might talk about it. I put the phone face down on the table. I made myself some coffee and drank it while looking around the room. On the wall, there was a photo of Leo and me at a small park, both of us smiling, a cheap kite in his hand. On a shelf nearby, there was a wooden box my father had made. Inside that box, I kept some of his things, an old watch, a few letters, and a folded document with the name of the lawyer's office. I had not opened that document in a long time. I went to the bedroom, changed into clean clothes, and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the same tired man from the hospital window, but something in his eyes was different. The usual doubt, the small question that always asked if maybe I was overreacting, was quieter now. After a short rest that did not feel like real sleep, I walked back into the living room and took out the wooden box. I opened it and lifted out the document folder with my father's handwriting on the front. He had written, "Family Trust, House Important," in careful letters. My chest tightened for a moment at the sight of his writing. I sat down at the small desk in the corner and spread the papers out. There were copies of trust documents, notes from meetings with the lawyer, and a letter addressed to me in his simple style. I remembered the day at the lawyer's office after his death. I had sat there, numb, while the lawyer explained that my father had set up things so that my mother would be taken care of, but that I, as his son, would have to sign off on major changes. At the time, I only heard the parts about forms and signatures. Now I read more carefully. The trust papers were full of legal terms, phrases that felt heavy and hard to read. I saw words like trustee, beneficiary, conditions, and conduct. Someone, probably the lawyer, had highlighted certain sentences in yellow. My father had underlined a phrase in pen. The phrase included the word grandchildren. Next to it, in the margin, he had written a short note that said that he wanted to protect future children in the family from bad decisions made by adults, including himself and my mother. I read that note more than once. It was like hearing his quiet voice again from years ago, when he used to remind me that being calm did not mean being weak. I remembered a talk we had in the kitchen once, after my mother had shouted at me for refusing to go along with one of her plans. My father had waited until she left the room. Then he told me that sometimes the only way to stop a person who loved control was to take away the tools they used to control others. At the time, I did not fully understand. Now those words came back in a sharper way. I did not understand every detail in the papers, but I could see the basic shape. My father had given my mother rights to use the house and some money as long as certain conditions were met. He had also given the trustee power to change things if those conditions were broken, especially when it came to the safety and respect of the next generation. My name was on the line that named the current trustee. There was no doubt about that. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling for a while. The idea that I had some real, legal power in this situation felt strange. For so long, I had been the one controlled, the one pulled back and forth by my mother's approval or disapproval. Now I saw, in black and white, that my father had quietly placed a key in my hand years ago. I had just never used it. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up, half expecting another long message from my mother. Instead, it was a shorter message from Sophia. She wrote that Mom was upset, that I was making things worse, and that I needed to stop talking to hospital staff about the cake. She said that accidents happen and that Leo was fine now, so there was no need to destroy the family over one mistake. She added that Mom was thinking of changing things in her will and that I would regret pushing too hard. There it was again, the same language. Not about Leo's near death, but about money and image. I scrolled through old messages in the family group chat. There were my long explanations about the allergy, complete with pictures of safe products and warnings about nuts. There were my mother's short replies, teasing me about being scared, and Sophia's jokes about bubble wrapping Leo. I had kept these messages without thinking. Now they looked like a record of a pattern. I saved screenshots of the key parts and moved them into a separate folder on my phone. I also opened my voicemail and listened again to the last message from my mother before I blocked her. In that message, while Leo was in intensive care, she had talked about Sophia's birthday decorations and had told me that if I did not show up, I would be cut off. The words sounded even colder now that I had some distance. In my contact list, I searched for the name of the lawyer who had handled my father's trust. The name appeared, Priya Patel. I had not spoken to her since the months after the funeral. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the call button. I did not press it yet. Instead, I locked the screen and put the phone down next to the trust papers. The room was very quiet. Outside, I could hear a car door slam, distant voices, life moving on. Inside, something settled in me. It was not a burst of anger or a desire to shout. It was a calm decision that the way things had been could not continue. My mother had crossed a line when she put Leo's life below her pride and then tried to make me feel guilty for reacting. There was no going back to normal after that. I gathered the papers into a neat stack and put them back into the folder, but this time I left the folder on the desk instead of hiding it in the wooden box. I placed my phone on top of it. As I did, the screen lit up again with a new notification. It was a group message from Sophia, sent to me, my mother, and a few other family members. She wrote that we needed to talk like adults and stop the drama. She said that she had booked a table in a private room at a nice restaurant for the next evening so we could clear the air. She ended by saying that it was time to sort out what would happen with Leo and with the future of the family. I looked at the message and felt the calm inside me grow even more. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was walking into a trap. I felt like I was walking towards something I should have faced years ago. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, even though I had barely slept. For a moment, I lay still in the half-dark of my bedroom and felt the weight of the last days pressing on my chest. Then I thought of Leo's face in the ICU, his small mouth forming the words about Grandma and the cake, and the weight turned into a kind of sharp focus. I went into the kitchen, made coffee, and sat at the table with a notebook and a pen. The table had stains and scratches, but it had seen every important conversation in my life with Leo, and now it would see this. I wrote a simple heading at the top of the page, Things I Know. Then, under it, I listed facts, not feelings. I wrote that Leo had a confirmed severe nut allergy. I wrote that my mother knew this, that I had told her many times, in person and in messages. I wrote that she had given him cake at her house. I wrote that the ambulance had been called from that address. I wrote that the hospital report mentioned nut exposure. Then I made a second list, things I needed. I wrote that I needed the hospital records that described the reaction and the likely cause. I wrote that I needed the ambulance report. I wrote that I needed copies of my old messages to my mother and to Sophia about the allergy. I wrote that I needed proof that I had warned them. I added the trust papers to the list, even though they were already on my desk. Seeing all of it in one place on the page made it feel more real and less like a storm in my head. When I had finished the lists, I checked the time. Visiting hours for the ICU were still a bit away, and Leo was resting. I decided to use the morning. I took a photo of my notebook page with my phone, put the notebook back on the shelf, and picked up the folder with the trust documents. I did not open it again yet. I just held it under my arm like a reminder that my father had left me more than memories. At the hospital, instead of going straight up to the ICU, I stopped at the records window. The woman behind the glass wore a name tag and had tired but kind eyes. I told her that I was Leo's father and that I needed copies of his discharge summary and any notes related to his allergic reaction. I explained that there had been a serious incident at a relative's house and that I might need records for later. I kept my voice steady and polite. She nodded and asked me to fill out a form. While I wrote, she checked the computer. She said that some documents would only be ready after he moved out of intensive care, but that she could give me the initial report and the emergency admission notes. She printed out a small stack of papers and slipped them through the opening in the glass. She pointed at one section where the note mentioned exposure to a likely nut-containing product at his grandmother's address. She said that the doctor had written that down based on what the paramedics and I had said. Seeing the words in black and white made my throat tight. I thanked her and put the papers carefully into a simple cardboard folder I had brought in my backpack. I went up to see Leo. He was drowsy, but better. His color had returned a little, and he managed a small smile when he saw me. I spoke to him softly, asked him how he felt. He said that his chest hurt less and that he was tired. I told him that being tired was normal and that the doctors were happy with his progress. I did not mention anything about Grandma. That conversation would come later, when he was stronger and when the adults around him were safer. In the early afternoon, when a nurse suggested I take another short break, I drove to Mia's townhouse. She had messaged me and asked if she could help in any way that did not involve standing at hospital machines and worrying. When she opened the door, she already looked tired. Her eyes went straight to the folder in my hand. We sat at her small dining table. I laid out the hospital papers, my notes, and my phone. I told her calmly what Leo had said about the cake and about Grandma asking him not to tell me. I saw the anger flash in her eyes, not at me, but at the situation. She shook her head slowly and said that this went beyond a simple mistake now. She reminded me that she had also warned my mother several times about the allergy when Leo stayed there on her days. I scrolled through my messages and showed her the long texts I had sent to my mother over the years, the detailed instructions, the links to allergy information, the reminders before every visit. I also showed her my mother's short replies, the ones where she said that I worried too much, or that she would not turn Leo into a bubble child. Mia pulled out her phone and added her own messages to the pile. In some of them, she had told Linda the same things, had asked her to follow the rules, had thanked her for watching Leo while reminding her of the danger. It was all right there, with dates and times. We took screenshots of the important exchanges, in case anyone ever deleted anything. I created a new album on my phone and moved them there. Mia did the same. She said that Leo needed at least one parent who would not let people gaslight him about his own body. She added that if I wanted to take this through proper channels, she would back me up with what she knew and what she had written. Hearing her say proper channels struck something in me. For years, I had tried to handle my mother with emotional tools, patience, explanations, giving in where I could. It had not worked. Now the idea of handling things with systems and documents instead of raised voices felt like the only thing that made sense. After I left Mia's place, I sat in my car for a few minutes and looked at my phone again. The contact list sat open at the name of the lawyer who had managed my father's trust, Priya Patel. This time, I did not just stare at it. I tapped the call button. When she answered, I introduced myself, explained that I was Adrian, son of her former client, and reminded her briefly that she had handled my father's estate a few years back. She said that she remembered me and my family. She asked how my mother was. The question felt strange after all that had happened, but I kept my voice calm and said that there had been a serious incident with my son and that some of the trust rules might now be important. She listened in that careful, measured way that good lawyers do, and then offered me an appointment the next day. Her office was in a low building not far from the city center. The next afternoon, after making sure Leo was stable and Mia was nearby, I drove there with the trust folder on the passenger seat. The waiting room was quiet, with framed certificates on the walls and a coffee machine in the corner. When Patel called me into her office, she greeted me with a small nod and gestured for me to sit at the table across from her. The room smelled of paper and something like lemon cleaner. There were shelves filled with files. On the wall, there was a simple painting of a tree. Patel sat with my father's old file in front of her, the one she had pulled out after our phone call. I took a breath and told her everything, from Leo's allergy and my endless reminders, to the sleepover at my mother's house, to the cake, the ambulance, and the ICU. I told her about Leo's words when he woke up, and about the messages from my mother and Sophia afterward. I did not raise my voice once. I just laid out the facts, like lines on a page. Patel listened without interrupting, only taking a few notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the trust folder and flipped to a section she had already marked with a yellow tab. She reminded me that my father had written a specific clause into the trust. She explained in clear terms that he had given the trustee power to change how and whether certain people benefited from the trust if they put minor family members in danger or publicly disrespected the role of the trust and its purpose. She said that at the time she had asked him why he wanted it. He had told her that he had seen how strong my mother's need for control could be and that he wanted a safety valve for future children. I felt something heavy in my chest when I heard that. It was like my father had seen the pattern coming and had quietly tried to leave me a tool to handle it. Patel did not tell me what to do. Instead, she laid out options. She said that I could decide to do nothing legal and just limit contact between Leo and my mother informally. She said I could write a formal warning letter, noting the incident and making clear that any future harm could trigger changes to my mother's benefits from the trust. Then she said that, given the seriousness of the reaction and my mother's response, there was also the option to act now and adjust her rights to the house and income, redirecting more of the benefits toward Leo's care and future. She also told me that if I chose the stronger action, it had to be done cleanly and with documentation. She mentioned that the hospital records, the ambulance report, the messages from me and Mia, and even my mother's email could all support the decision if she ever tried to contest it. She said that my father's clause was not vague. It had been written for situations like this, where someone's behavior clearly endangered a grandchild. I sat there and absorbed all of this. It was a strange feeling, being told that I had the power, legally, to change the rules of a game that had always been played against me. For a second, I thought about what my mother would say if she knew I was here. She would probably call me a traitor, an ungrateful son, a thief. Then I pictured Leo in that hospital bed again, and the noise in my head went quiet. I told Patel that I did not want revenge. I told her that I wanted safety and boundaries. I said that if the trust was meant to protect the next generation, then it needed to actually do that. She nodded and said that this was exactly how the law was supposed to be used. She suggested that we gather all the documents, prepare a clear timeline, and then draft the necessary instructions and notices. She said that she could handle the legal language as long as I was clear about what I wanted to change. We agreed that I would send her scanned copies of the hospital notes, the screenshots of messages, and my father's letter. She said that once she had everything, she would prepare the paperwork and we would decide how and when to deliver the news to my mother. She added that, in situations like this, people often tried to twist the story in public, so it was wise to be ready before any big family meeting. On the drive home, I felt strange but focused. The sky was overcast and traffic moved slowly. At a red light, I opened my email app and started uploading the scanned documents I had already saved, sending them to Patel's secure address one by one. At home, I sat at my desk and organized my files more neatly. One folder for medical records, one for messages, one for trust documents and notes from Patel. My phone kept buzzing every now and then with small notifications. Sophia sent a short message saying that Mom was still upset, but that the dinner she planned at the restaurant would help everyone see reason. My mother sent a brief line through another family member's phone, saying that she expected me to come and explain myself like a man, and not hide behind doctors and forms. Neither of them asked how Leo felt that day. They only asked if I was coming to the table they had chosen. By the evening, I had done what I could for the day. I went back to the hospital, sat beside Leo, and read him a story until he drifted off again. When I finally got home that night, I checked my email once more before going to bed. There, at the top of my inbox, was a new message. It was from my mother's usual address, but the style was different. The subject line said, "Family Discussion, Leo and Inheritance." The email itself was a formal calendar invitation to a dinner in a private room at an upscale restaurant called La Terraza. The description said that we would talk about what happened with Leo and clarify the future of the family and the house. The time was set for 2 days from now. I stared at the invite for a long moment. Then I clicked accept and watched as it appeared in my calendar like another appointment. Just one more slot in a week that suddenly felt very full. The morning after Sophia's message, I woke up with my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. For a few seconds, I did not remember where I was. Then the hospital ceiling came back to mind. Leo's monitor, his small voice saying that Grandma told him not to tell me. The family dinner invite sat in my phone like a stone. I swung my legs out of bed and decided that if my mother wanted a discussion, I would at least walk into it prepared. In the kitchen, I made coffee that tasted too bitter and sat at the table with an empty sheet of paper. I wrote the date at the top and made 2 columns. On one side, I wrote what happened. On the other, what I can show. Under what happened, I listed each event one by one. Leo's allergy diagnosis, the first small reaction at my mother's house, the warnings I gave, the sleepover, the cake, the ambulance, the ICU, the messages afterward. Under what I can show, I wrote where proof might exist, texts, hospital notes, emails, the trust documents from my father. Seeing it this way turned my fear into something structured. It stopped being a storm and started being a file. I took photos of the list, then grabbed my backpack. I put my father's trust folder in it, along with my notebook and a cheap cardboard file I had picked up from a discount store for papers. Before I left, I walked into Leo's room at home. His bed was empty and neatly made. His favorite stuffed dinosaur sat in the corner. For a moment, I had to put my hand on the door frame to steady myself. Then I locked the apartment and headed to the hospital. Instead of going straight up to the ICU, I stopped at the reception and asked for the medical records office. They gave me directions to a small window down a side corridor. A woman there asked how she could help me. I told her my name, Leo's name, and explained that I needed copies of any reports related to his allergic reaction, especially the admission notes. My voice stayed even, but I could feel my palms sweating inside my pockets. She gave me a form to fill out and checked her computer while I wrote. After a few minutes, she printed out several pages and slid them toward me. She pointed to a paragraph where the doctor had noted that Leo presented with anaphylaxis after eating suspected nut-containing cake at his grandmother's address. Seeing those words, anaphylaxis, and grandmother's address next to each other in a calm, typed sentence made my throat dry. I thanked her carefully, put the papers into my cardboard folder, and closed it. Upstairs, Leo was awake for a short while. He looked better, though still pale and tired. I sat with him, read a few pages of his favorite comic book, and answered his small questions about when we could go home and whether he could still have his safe cookies. I told him, yes, of course, the safe ones were still okay. I did not mention my mother. His eyes drifted closed again after a while. The nurse leaned in to check his vitals and told me he was doing well. For the first time since the ambulance call, my shoulders dropped a little. Later in the day, Mia arrived to take a shift at his bedside so I could handle some paperwork. She hugged me briefly, her arms tight, and asked if I had eaten. Then she told me that she had also kept her old messages with my mother and that they might help. We agreed to meet at her place while Leo slept and the nurses watched him. At her townhouse, we sat at her small dining table like we had years ago when we were still married and trying to figure out bills. This time, the only thing on the table was my folder, her phone, and a cup of tea. I showed her the hospital notes. She read the part about the suspected nutcake and shook her head, pressing her lips together. She whispered that this could have been a funeral instead of a meeting, and that she could not believe Linda was sending emails about her hurt feelings instead of asking about Leo. I opened the family group chat on my phone and scrolled back months. There were my long explanations about Leo's allergy, the safe foods list, the reminders before each visit. We took screenshots of every message where I told my mother, no nuts, no cakes from bakeries, nothing with unknown ingredients, and every reply where she joked about me being overprotective or said that she would not wrap him in foam. Mia did the same with her own message history. In some, she had sent links to medical articles. In others, she had thanked Linda for watching Leo while clearly repeating the rules. We organized the screenshots into albums and then copied them to my laptop and to a small USB drive I had at home. By the time we finished, it was already afternoon. Mia looked at the pile of digital proof and said that this was not a story about a simple mistake anymore. She said that if I wanted to go further with this, it should be done the right way, through people who dealt with such things. I agreed. I told her about my father's trust clause and the folder I had brought. For a moment, she stared at me, surprised. She had never known how detailed my father had been. She said that maybe he had seen what could happen and had tried in his way to help. On my way back to the hospital, I sat in my car for a few minutes in the parking lot and took a breath. Then I opened my contacts, scrolled to the name of the lawyer, Priya Patel, and pressed call. I reminded her who I was, that she had handled my father's estate, and said that I needed to talk about the trust and a serious issue with my son's safety. She did not sound surprised that life had brought us back together. She offered me an appointment the next day. The next afternoon, after checking that Leo was stable and that Mia was there with him, I drove to Patel's office. The building was low and quiet, with glass doors and a plain sign. Inside, the waiting room smelled like paper and weak coffee. When she called my name, I walked into a conference room with a large table and shelves full of files. We sat across from each other, my father's old file and my new cardboard folder between us. I told her the story in order, from Leo's diagnosis to the last email from my mother. I did not raise my voice, though parts of it hurt to say. Patel listened without interrupting, only nodding now and then. When I finished, she opened my father's trust file and turned to a section she had already marked. She reminded me that my father had written a clause that allowed the trustee to adjust or even remove benefits from someone who endangered minor family members or who abused the trust's purpose. She did not quote the exact wording, she only summarized it in clear language. She said that, in her view, the combination of a repeated allergy warning, my mother's choice to ignore it, the severity of Leo's reaction, and her responses afterward could fit within that clause. She also made it clear that any action had to be careful and supported by documentation if we wanted it to stand. I slid the hospital notes toward her. She read the part about the nutcake and the grandmother's address and made a small mark in her notebook. Then I showed her my screenshots and some printed messages I had brought. She did not need to see every single one. A few clear examples were enough to show a pattern. She nodded and said that we had more than just emotions here. We had a written trail. Then she asked me what I wanted, not what my mother might deserve, not what would hurt her most, but what outcome I was looking for. I thought for a moment. I said that I wanted my son safe, that I wanted my mother to have no power to force herself into his life or use money as a leash. I said that if the house and the income attached to it were being used as a stick to hit me with, maybe that stick should be taken away. Patel suggested that we prepare documents that would adjust my mother's right to the house and trust income, shifting more control and future benefit toward Leo and any other grandchildren. She also proposed a formal notice-setting conditions for any future contact with Leo to show that this was not a personal vendetta but a clear boundary based on behavior. She said that we did not need to swing everything in one day, but that we could act firmly. She told me to send her all the digital files I had gathered and said that she would draft the papers. We agreed that, given the planned family dinner, timing would matter. She said that sometimes people showed their true faces when they felt secure in their control, and that it might be better to let my mother lay out her position before I laid out mine. When I left her office, the late afternoon light made everything look sharp. I drove home with a strange calm inside me. At home, I scanned the hospital notes and saved the screenshots of messages on my laptop, then emailed them to Patel's secure address. I backed everything up on the USB drive and placed it next to the trust folder on my desk. The small pile of paper and plastic looked unimpressive, but I knew what it contained. That night, as I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone buzzed again. It was a calendar reminder about the dinner at La Terrazza in 2 days, the one my mother had framed as a family discussion about Leo and the future. I stared at the reminder, then at the folder on my desk. For years, I had walked into these family gatherings unarmed, hoping for understanding. This time, I would walk in with something different. 2 days later, the morning of the dinner, I woke up before my alarm again. The sky outside my window was gray, with a slow rain starting. Leo had been moved out of intensive care to a regular pediatric ward. He was stronger now, able to sit up and ask when he could go home. I visited him early, brought him a small puzzle, and told him that I had a meeting that evening, but that Mia would be with him and that I would be back after. He nodded, more interested in the puzzle than my schedule. That was good. He did not need to carry more of this than he already had. After leaving the hospital, I went back to my apartment and opened my email. There were messages from Patel. She wrote that the documents we had discussed were ready. She said that she had prepared amendments and notices based on my instructions and the trust clause, and that all they needed now were signatures and a notary stamp. She did not attach the text to the email. She said we would go over them in person. We met at her office again in the early afternoon. This time she had a thin stack of papers on the table, each with small sticky notes marking where I needed to sign or initial. She summarized what each one did. One adjusted my mother's rights in the trust, one directed more of the house's future value and income toward Leo's trust, and one was a formal notice explaining why. She also had a letter prepared for my mother's lawyer, in case she chose to get one. I listened carefully, asked a few questions, then agreed. Patel said that we would need a notary. There was one at a small bank branch a few streets away. We walked there together. The notary was an older man with thin hair and thick glasses. He checked our IDs, watched me sign each page, then stamped them with a heavy seal. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper was dull but satisfying. It felt like the sound of a door closing on an old version of my life. When we were done, Patel took some of the originals for her files and gave me copies in a simple folder. She said that she would send the necessary notices the next day after I had had my conversation with my mother. She suggested that I bring only what I felt safe bringing to the dinner, but reminded me that I did not need to show everything there. The decisions were already set in motion. The dinner was just where my mother would learn about them. On my way home, I stopped at my building's underground garage. It was quiet, the air smelling faintly of oil and dust. I opened the trunk of my car and laid out the folder from Patel, my own trust folder, and the cardboard file with the hospital notes. I took the USB drive from my pocket and placed it in a small envelope. I wrote a date on the envelope in small, neat letters. Then I put the envelope in the glove box. It felt like placing a backup key somewhere safe. Back upstairs in my apartment, I showered and put on a clean shirt and the only jacket I owned that still fit me properly. I was not trying to impress anyone, but I wanted to look like a man who took himself seriously. On the coffee table, I laid out a smaller stack of papers. A copy of the hospital note that mentioned the nutcake, a printout of a few key messages, and a short summary I had written of the events, in case my mind went blank at the table. As the time for the dinner grew closer, my phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. She wrote that she hoped I was coming with an open mind and that Mom just wanted to fix things. There was also a line about not making a scene in front of Aunt Carla and the others. I read it once and did not reply. Before I left, I went to Leo's room again in my mind. I pictured him in the hospital bed, coloring slowly in a book, taking small sips of water. I reminded myself that this was about him, not about winning an argument from my childhood. Then I picked up my small stack of papers, slid them into a plain envelope, and slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket. I drove to La Terraza as the sky turned dark. The restaurant was one of those places my mother liked to choose, with tall windows, warm lighting, and a host at the door who recognized regulars. Inside, everything was polished wood and soft background music. The host greeted me and asked my name. When I told him, he smiled professionally and said that my party was already here, in a private room at the back. He led me down a short corridor lined with framed photos of famous guests. The sounds of the main dining room faded behind us. At the end of the hall was a closed wooden door. I could hear the low murmur of voices inside, my mother's laugh rising a little above the others. The host reached for the handle. I touched the envelope in my pocket once, feeling the thin edges of the paper through the fabric, and took a slow breath as the door began to open. My mother started the dinner by announcing that I had lost perspective and cost Leo his grandmother. She said the accident was small and that I needed to sign her papers to prove loyalty. I let her talk. Then I laid the hospital report, the messages, and my timeline on the table. I played the voicemail where she cut me off while Leo lay in intensive care. Faces around us changed. I calmly explained that the trust clause was already executed, her rights reduced, Leo's protected. Contact would now be supervised. Their voices rose behind me as I walked out.